And then please help yourselves to the refreshments in the back of the room. And please make sure that your phones are turned off or on silent. And Disha has a sign-up sheet. Please make sure that you sign up. If you are here, we want to make sure that you are signed up. So Disha will make sure that you have the sheet. Okay. So many of you know or remember Sudha and Vijay from the time when they were actually living in the Twin Cities and before they returned to India for full-time community-based work in 2007, 2008. And today they will be sharing with us some insights, lessons, and stories from this work of more than 14 years. Just a few words about what they do. So Sudha Nagavarapu supports grassroots organizations in India through collective action, documentation, and fundraising. She has co-organized efforts to resist injustice, discriminatory policies, and hate-driven violence. She works with a number of groups in Uttar Pradesh and Karnataka, including the Sangathan Kisan Mazdoor Sangathan in Sitapur district of UP. And she also coordinates research on food and farming transitions with academics in Delhi and Bangalore. And Dwijendra Nath Guru promotes efforts to move towards sustainable food systems. He helps communities in developing solutions to people, process, machine, and product-related challenges. Vijay has modified existing machines and developed process flows for small millet processing that meet the needs of the producer community, improve nutrition retention, and reduce pest infestations. He has developed tutorials and trained people on small millet processing and quality assessment. So we have envisioned today's event as a conversation that will hopefully continue in other forms, in other sites, and through grassroots collaborations. So Sudha and Vijay will each talk for about 20-25 minutes. Sure. Yes? Yeah. Okay. Then we want to invite you to engage with their insights and experiences and stories through, of course, questions and comments, but things that have been on your minds through your journeys with politics and ecology of food. So we hope that there will be some good conversations that would be seeded today that would go beyond 6:30 p.m. This evening. So please welcome Sudha and Vijay.
Thank you. Thanks, Richa. Yeah, so good to see all of you all. Some old faces, some new faces, and it's always great to be back in the Twin Cities. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't really prepare too much, but I thought I'll hit on a few points about food, but also maybe our journeys, because I think there's always this little bit about, you know, how did you start doing what you started doing? It wasn't planned, it wasn't very systematic, but so I come from an engineering background. I studied engineering like so many Indians do, and then worked in a medical device company right here in the Twin Cities. And I mean, from 2002 onwards, I became active with the Association for India's Development, which some of you are active with, and met Dwiji there. So I mean, a lot of the discussions that used to happen back then and that have continued to happen, it's like it's an India that I did not know, and that should not be surprising to any of us. I mean, people make a lot of statements that India is this and India is that, but hello, I mean, it's 1.2 billion people, it's 9 agroecological zones, 9 or 10, I forget, but I think the US has 12. So, you know, India has 9 or 10. There's so many languages spoken. There's so many. You drive from Bangalore to, say, Anandpur, which is just across the border in Andhra Pradesh, and the flavors of Telugu that you hear from Bangalore to Anantapur, I mean, it's changing every 50 kilometers, right? The words that people use and the way they express themselves. So there's so much diversity. So I think where food is concerned, uh, that diversity is, I mean, people understand it, but then there are always these statements like India is a vegetarian country. India, the staple in India is rice and wheat. In the north, they'll say, oh, potato, right? And then when you start just digging under the surface just a little bit, you find so much more. So, I mean, until about 6, 7 years ago, I was more focused on healthcare, on health rights, on access to healthcare. And around that time, I was beginning to see the limits of it. The minute you start pushing for more health services, it translates into more medicines, more access to, procedures, operations, all the interventions. And I mean, what about the basics, right? What are people eating? We did, I used to work with a group in Bangalore at that time, and we just did a little survey among, so this was with Dalit and Muslim women in the slums of Bangalore. And we just did this little survey about what kind of health problems they had. Almost all of them reported thyroid problems. All of them said, anemia and all of those kinds of things. And anecdotally too, you had this whole thing, madam, I'm just feeling so weak. I went to the hospital and, they just put glucose in me and I'm feeling better, right? They just go and get intravenous glucose and they just feel better. Now, I mean, that's how much that did. I mean, what's the psychological thing? How much is the effort of spending, 200 rupees, 500 rupees, whatever it costs to get that glucose administered? I mean, there's so many factors there, right? Adding to these people feeling better. So on the health care side of things, I sort of began seeing the limits. And I was already interested in agriculture, and then the intersection with food sort of organically happened, for lack of a better word. So in 2017, the Sanatan Kisan Mazdoor Sangathan, the collective in Uttar Pradesh, maybe I should just speak a little bit about that too. And Richa Nagar has been, I mean, she introduced us to it actually. She introduced us to Richa Singh and the group in Sitapur. So Sitapur is in central Uttar Pradesh. So this is the Gangetic Plain, right? The upper Gangetic Plain to be more accurate. And it's flat. One would think the place, would be a fertile land because it's a Gangetic Plain. One would assume that, it has good rainfall. That region it's part of Awadh. So Awadh historically was called the Garden of India. It had this special connotation. This was the place that people came to when there was famine in other parts of India, because this was the place where people could get something to eat. But you look at the numbers today, so there's this National Family and Health Survey, which is about which is done about every 4-5 years, where all kinds of health and nutrition records are taken. And that year, the rate of childhood stunting, right? This is the number which says that a child is short for their age because of malnutrition. Sitapur was the bottom 3rd district in all of India, right? Not just Uttar Pradesh, not just North India, all of India. And then, and it was quite shocking, obviously. We knew things were bad, but we didn't know that things were this bad. And that entire region of central UP, it's really interesting that you have high levels of inequity, and numbers like childhood stunting, anemia, all of these are pretty bad. Instantly from 2015 to 2019, the numbers are much better. and always, one can never take numbers at face value in India. But still, it is indicative of deeper problems. So around that time, uh, I met. So there's Richa Singh in Sitapur. There's Richa Nagar. I met a third Richa, Richa Kumar, who's a professor who's an ethnographer, anthropologist at IIT Delhi. And we started talking about all these things. And we started talking about the collective in Sitapur. Oh, I sort of skipped that again. So the collective in Sitapur is of marginal farmer laborers, right? So these are people who may own land, and whatever land they own is really marginal. So they farm their own land. I mean, a lot of people who are farmers in India don't actually farm. I mean, I'm a farmer on paper. I own land, but that doesn't mean anything. I don't grow the crops there. So the farmer laborers that we are talking about are the people who farm their own land or who lease or share crop. I mean, there is this batai, which means they farm someone's land and they share all the expenses and they share the harvest. Right? So these are those kind of people, mostly Dalits, who do agricultural labor, who migrate to cities. After the lockdown in 2020, we had so many sathis. So the members of the collective we call sathis. So many sathis or their kids or their family members stuck in Delhi, stuck in Himachal Pradesh, stuck in different places that, I mean, there were a lot of calls. Some people managed to get back, some people were stuck. So, so these were the people, all those photos that emerged around that time, these are communities like that. So the collective is, membership is about 5,000. It's quite active in the western part of Sitapur and then in some parts of neighboring Hardoi district. And so when I met Richa Kumar, we started talking about, just our frustration with whatever we were trying to do with farming, about the poor nutrition levels and why that's so. I mean, why is it, you think about a drought-prone region, you'd say, okay, there might be starvation, there might be hunger. Why is there hunger here? And then from that conversation, we just started a collaboration. So we looked at what was happening with nutrition right then. Like we got a really good snapshot throughout 2017. And I mean, I won't go into details now, but if there's interest, I can go into that. And then we started looking at the history, right? Because why are things the way they are? And for me, it was just a fascinating journey. Just things that I hadn't thought about. But then if I start thinking even to my own experiences with my mother's native village or, whatever I've come across in urban and rural India, I can see the linkages now. But at that time, we were asking people what they were eating. And I mean, they started. So if you think about millets, millets is on everyone's tongue. It's everywhere. Next year is going to be the international, actually 23 is the 23 is the international year of millets. So everyone's talking about millets. There's supposedly these superfoods. All kinds of virtue is being bestowed on them. People talk. They say, okay, this has iron and calcium and protein, and every possible thing they'll start saying millets has it. So people are going gaga over it. So these older people that we were talking to did talk about millets, but they talked about a lot of other stuff that we hadn't thought about. And the more, and one thing we need to realize in the politics of food is that a lot of food it's like what is not mentioned, what people don't talk about in food might be even more important than what they talk about, right? What they say they eat. Because, and I think, researchers have heard about this, read about this, but, people are very smart. The respondents, right? The people that we go to interview or that we bring together in focus group discussions, they're very smart. They know what you want to hear. They tell you what you want to hear. And there's so much to say about food. I mean, we can just talk and talk for hours and hours. And the stories don't really emerge. So one thing, I mean, for me, the learning was that, in an ethnographic process, you really keep pushing, you keep probing, you hear something, and then you go and ask a few more people about it. You keep asking, because it took us a year before we really started seeing things emerge. So, yeah, how much time do I have?
A minute or two.
Another minute or two. Okay, right. So, I think the learnings was that the land is heterogeneous, that all land was not cultivated, and therefore food was heterogeneous. And food was heterogeneous not just about, where the geography is concerned, where you were getting food from, but food was heterogeneous based on who the people were that were eating that food, right? The whole, the caste aspect, the caste plus geography plus gender, all these intersections really drive what people were eating, what people had access to, what people ate, what people treasured, and what people looked down as, we had to eat this, we were forced to eat this. This is dehati, this is backward. We wish we could eat now we can eat the food of the rich, right? So that ration which urban India loves to make fun of, rice card converts, they'll call the Dalit Christians, or right now in UP with the 10 kilos of ration, there's a lot of snide remarks, or it's just taken very casually. But it's actually, when you look at it from the point of view of oppressed communities, what they had access to and what they're eating now, it acquires a whole lot more meaning. And I'll just end with one last remark. So for those of you who followed the UP election last year, so one of the things that the government did was give people salt. And then almost every leader, every politician who went to talk to people said, "Aapne hamara namak khaya hai. You ate our salt." And that, you don't think about it, but there was so much sophistication in this whole thing, right? That, you ate our salt, now vote for us.
Yeah.
And so it's not just that they got that ration, but it was the way in which it was framed. So, food gets used at so many levels and in so many different ways. So I'll stop for now. I should share, once Dwiji is done, I'll just share the link of the portal we are working on, and you can look at it for more. There's more documentation of the research in Uttar Pradesh. Yeah?
So this is the first time that both of us are doing this together. So we work at very different paces. So my presentation, my sharings are going to be very different when compared to what Sudha shared. So my apologies for the jarring differences in speed and stuff. So I come from a technology background. I did my PhD in mechanical engineering at the U on the East Bank, and in the Minneapolis campus. While I was doing my PhD, I got politicized. This was post the 2002 riots and in Gujarat, and I decided that I shouldn't just be quiet. I should actually participate in the conversations about what was happening in Gujarat, because I lived there just the year before I came to Minneapolis, St. Paul. So that politicization journey took me to a point within a couple of years to decide that I'm going to leave all this and go back and work on something more meaningful than gas turbines and jet engines. And better sense prevailed. I decided no, I'll finish my PhD. Of course, by then we were already married, and the better sense was obviously where it came from. But not just her, but many others, but her included. So the idea of what would my skills be useful for, or what can it be of use to for communities that are struggling, that are fighting, that are fighting the right fight. Fights for justice, for equity. So that was what took me back to India, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I actually, for a year and a half, we traveled, and over the course of travel, I realized the extent to which technology is political. Of course, I had already started working on appropriate technology while I was here, using whatever time and resources that I could gather. But only when I started interacting with people and listening to their requirements did I realize the disconnect between what people want and what solutions are offered or put in front of them. And that's when I decided that, look, we need to right this wrong. And we can do that only when people who are trained in technology can bring in the right politics. You can have all the right politics we have, but unless we can speak the language of what people working on technology and policy and these things can understand, we will not be able to communicate our requirements and our demand, our rights in other words. So that was when I started working on technology and agriculture and associated aspects. And by about 2014, I had 13 actually, early 2013, late 12, early 2013. After working on bamboo and cotton, I started working on dryland agriculture, and primarily because if we think of food, we can't really think of irrigated crops and irrigation, stuff grown out of irrigation and inputs to be a solution towards a sustainable future. So I started looking at dryland crops and therefore millets, of course, and it's fascinating how much variety we have when it comes to food, but how little is documented, right? Like Sudha was talking about earlier about once you start scratching the layers, you'll start seeing the many different flavors underneath. But otherwise, it's all like Indian food, right? So what is that? What is that when we say, Avdi Khana or, Rayalseema's food or Guntur? So, so the idea of diversity is very critical when we look at sustainability. Because unless we have diversity, nobody has the solution, right? We don't know what will take us to sustainability. And now I'm at the point where I'll say that sustainability is not even a destination. It's just a process. It's a journey, because you will never be sustainable. You'll always have to work towards that, and the realities of that particular moment are going to change. So you have to then factor those in and move forward. So in that sense, I felt that, look, if we are looking at sustainability and technology, they are very much integral. And I'll take a minute to bring this aspect out. There are quite a few folks who have grown up where either they themselves or they would have seen in their families that rice used to be cleaned before it could be cooked, right? Paddy rice. Because what you bought in the store or what you got through your ration PDS was not something that was directly, cookable or edible. So you had to clean it out. But into the 90s and late 90s, actually, we didn't have to do that. You could just get a packet from the store or get your supplies and wash it and cook it. Now, what brought about that change? Right? It's also that time when we also see the emergence of brand oils. So that was the time when Ford Foundation, with all its good intentions, benefit of doubt, giving the benefit of doubt, with all its good intentions, said that, hey, paddy is being grown and processed across the world, and people are able to get good food. That Sudha was talking about, food, especially paddy and wheat, are aspirational foods. The rich and the famous and the powerful ate these foods, ate these grains, and now that was made available to everyone through public distribution. The Green Revolution flooded the markets with some of these varieties, which brought down the prices for consumers, all that. So, but that wasn't necessarily helping, quote unquote, helping the intermediaries who were running this process supply chain, and mainly the millers. And Ford Foundation did this study and realized, or not realized, but they came to this conclusion that if we took the bran out and extracted the oil in that, it's extremely nutritious, and you can actually sell it as a commodity, thereby setting up a secondary revenue chain, revenue supply for the processes, which is true, Rice bran oil is fairly good, but what does it do? It basically takes the bran out of the grains that you get in your food. Now, bran is where the fibers are, bran is where the oil is, of course, but bran is also the place where minerals are. So you strip out, and of course, when you're debraning, you cannot but take out the germ. Germ is where a grain germinates and becomes a plant, right? So as you can expect, germ is where the proteins are concentrated. So degerming happens, you take out the bran, you end up with carbohydrate-rich kernel, which inevitably today has resulted in the kind of lifestyle diseases that we see across the world, and not just among the rich and the powerful and the privileged, but even among communities which are really struggling to make ends meet. So this idea of setting up another revenue stream for the millers resulted in something that we see today all around us, which in some sense has brought us to this doorstep of millets, because millets are extremely nutritious. Why are they nutritious? Because they are dryland crops, right? So what makes dryland crops nutritious? Because the damn things can survive harsh conditions without our intervention. They don't need our help. Those things will survive. Wasn't that true about paddy as well? Surprisingly, I thought so too, that it's not true. Paddy has always been something that needed a lot of TLC before you can harvest the grain. But actually, if you see the histories, there are a zillion varieties of paddy. There are
About
many different
100,000.
varieties. Sorry?
About 100,000.
I mean, yeah. No, 100,000 in the
Identified.
subcontinental India.
Identified.
In the subcontinental India. But paddy rice was grown in many different places, just as millets were grown in many different places. So what I'm trying to say here is that what survived in the history books, who wrote the histories? Right? The rich and the powerful. What did they eat? Of course, they ate something that showed that they had the strength and the wealth to command, to show their affluence. So I would not go and write about Taco Bell. I would go and write about this new Mexican restaurant that has this amazing burrito, right? So it doesn't mean that burrito can't be made cheap and fast. So paddy, there are many different varieties of paddy which are dry crops, which do not need irrigation, right? But those were not the varieties that are written about. Those are not the things that are talked about in literature or in history, right? So what we have is essentially taking a broad interpretation of the word, gentrification of food, right? So where the food of the poor, the food that was accessible to the poor was nutritious because it grew by itself without human intervention. And with human intervention also, it was still fairly nutritious because the people who cultivated these crops, especially millets, did not have access to the kind of resources that the rich and powerful could pour into paddy to make varieties which are special, scented varieties of rice, varieties of rice which will cure a particular disease, right? And that's true. I mean, they have such medicinal properties. But then it also means that somebody worked on it. Not today, not in in the labs of Norman Borlaug or even University for that matter. But long ago, some king commissioned some set of people to develop varieties to celebrate his 50th anniversary on the throne. Right? So, but millets were never that kind of sexy crops. So they survived in the hands of the poor, of the oppressed, of the tribals, of the Adivasis, despite all the development that happened. So today what we see, thanks to the development of paddy into multi-revenue stream supply chain, right? We are back looking at millets and realizing that, oh wow, these are powerhouses of nutrition, right? Now, but unless we change the way we handle these things, unless we reorient our perspectives and our expectations from food, I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right? So whether you put paddy rice and you get the nutrition depleted, polished white rice, or you put millets in there and you get the same thing, which is bright white. I'm kicking myself. Today we visited a friend, old friend of ours, and they were showing me the millets that they get in the store here, because we do get millets in stores here as well. And I'm just kicking myself. I didn't get that packet from it. I should have, or I should have just stopped by a store and picked up one. But anyway, so I got some millets that we process, but I'll come to that later. So it's nutrition depleted again, unless we are conscious about what we want to retain in our food, whether it is in terms of the politics or in terms of the nutrition that we keep in it. So that's the technology and broad sweeps perspective that I bring into my work, and really looking forward to the conversation. And I would like to open up the floor so that we have a more interactive one. I hope where's the camera? That's the camera. Hey, friends on Zoom, please type in your questions. I think you can unmute yourself and talk as well. And we haven't yet checked out the speaker, but I think it should be quite okay. So could I ask? Yeah. Could I ask someone to moderate the discussion, please?
I will just.
Yeah, as
Yeah,
long
I'll
as
just
the
share.
Zoom questions.
Right.
One of us can.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to share this website.
Yes.
Yes, that
How
would be
do
great.
Yeah.
Talk about the website.
So this is something that came out of our research in Sitapur.
Just make it
So
full screen.
okay, make it full screen.
And there you go.
I don't know, figure it out. So after we shared the work that we did on our research, a friend in IIIT Bangalore, that's the International Institute of Information Technology.
Is it? Oh,
Yes.
Okay.
No, they're not allowed to call themselves the Indian Institute.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh.
There are politics behind that too. So they're the International Institute of Information Technology. So a friend there, Janki Srinivas, she'll be at the South Asia conference actually, for those of you who are going there. So she suggested we just make a portal, we just document what we discovered. So yeah, it's foodcultures.org. And then
Oh, sorry, I made it full screen and the link is gone.
not .com, .org.
दोनों मिलेगा शायद.
हमने खरीदा नहीं, we did not buy it.
We did.
Oh, you did?
We did.
Oh, you okay. I did not know that. Okay, so yeah, this was something we really struggled to make. I mean, we're still not happy about it, but we thought, okay, we need to show all the different categories of food. So you can click on each of these, and there are, there's information about all of this. And the site is bilingual, English and Hindi. The Hindi, we still need to upload the corrected versions. It's still under construction, but
Work in progress.
yes. But please take a look. Please give us feedback. We need to.
Can you a little bit more about it, because this is so much there.
Okay, so what?
What's the link again? Sorry.
Foodcultures.org. Okay.
We'll share it on with everyone who signed up to.
What shall I click on? What shall I click on?
Pulses.
Huh?
Pulses.
Pulses, sure. Yeah. So we just have a little blurb about it. And then we have these, so there's a timeline on the right. So this is like, yeah, I mean, we just tried to document how different events sort of changed. So like looking at everything from the point of view of pulses. The minute you have irrigation, people stop growing pulses. You know, so just the various forms of irrigation, and then the improved seeds, like all the green revolution stuff. Then this was one thing some people shared, that there was this drought in 79-80, and a lot of the traditional seeds were lost. So then people had to go to the market. I mean, they lost their traditional seeds. Yeah, so what was that? Oh, that's about, why is the millet stuff here? Okay, I have to correct that. Yeah, anyway, so just all the various things that affected that. And then on the left are the, these are just things that people said, what they felt about their foods. There's a glossary. And in some places you'll have videos, like this is a small video. We are just still working on this.
Yeah,
Let's see if it plays.
Just 1 second.
Huh.
I don't think the screen share.
Oh,
Audio.
okay.
1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks, just 1 second. I'll just confirm that the Zoom is taking the audio as well.
I mean, we don't have to play the whole video. Just.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so we just have these little videos. We have a lot of footage. As usual, you know, we have way more footage than we worked on. On foodcultures.org, these videos are referenced. Otherwise, there's a YouTube channel also.
तब से खेती कर रहे
All
हैं
right.
और तब क्या खेती
So actually, if anyone can help with Avadhi to English translation. So I just asked people that I knew, you know, I said Hindi to English translation, and they saw these videos, they said, I cannot understand it. So it's someone who can actually, you know.
And it's considered the Hindi heartland, right? But then the local dialects, there are so many in each place that.
Yeah, so I won't share this now, but
Yeah.
it's all available on the portal. So please feel free to look at it and provide feedback. Yeah.
Can we watch 3 minutes of that? I mean, I know we won't understand, but
So there's
No, you guys
subtitles.
can understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will understand, but maybe some of
there are subtitles.
Yeah.
There are subtitles. You want to? Okay, I can just play it.
कर रहे थे
तब गेहूँ ज़्यादा बोए जाते हैं, चना बोए जाते हैं, अरहर, मसूर, और खरीफ में गेहूँ जो ये सब, मतलब खरीफ में ज्वार, बाजरा, लोबिया, मौठी, उर्द, मकाई, ये चीज़ें बोई जाती रहे, सावा, काकुल, ये चीज़ें बोई जाती रहे, मूंग। और एक चीज़ जो आप बोई जा रहा है, भटवास कहा जाते हैं, वो देखे हम खाए हमको। दाल, चना, मटरी, मटरा और मसूर, अरहर, उड़द, लोबिया, मौठी, इतनी चीजें दाल होती रहे, 7-8 चीजें पैदा होती रहे, थोड़ी थोड़ी है तब हमें 12 महीना चुकती नहीं रहे।
अर्रा की दारी मन मन दूध मन दर के धल्ले ये ऐसा हो जाए।
हाँ खूब अर्रा खाते थे।
हाँ वो अर्रा की रोटी
हम दे कुंटल अर्रा अपने हाथ दरन और कोई मांगत रहा दाल खवासे हैं देखे मारे आते कैसे भर के कटोरा दे रहा और मांगी नहीं रहा तो हमका दे दो कर हमारे है ये तो काम मांगी।
तो दाल ये सब उड़द चना वो सब भी बहुत होता था।
हाँ तो सब हो रहा है, बहुत अधिक हो रहा है।
तब घर की अधिक दाल हो रहा है, कहलम डाल के रे बढ़िया ये भुर्जित कहलाए के रे और दरी जा रहा है, वह दाल संधाते रहे बढ़िया बनाई जा रहा है। अब का मलही दाल आओ तो मका संधापन नहीं हो, अच्छा कम ना फ्राई ना करो तो खाई निकी नहीं लगी। और तब दीदी नाई तेल हो रहा है नाई छौंकते वैसे ही बना के खा लेती, वह दाल संधार रहने के ना कर रहा।
मूंग बो देते थे और उड़द भी बोया जाता था, उड़द बहुत अधिक पैदा होता था। हाँ, उड़द की दाल खाते थे।
अच्छा तो उर्द में भी अलग अलग वैरायटी थी क्या?
हाँ ना, उर्द में एक बरसात में जल्दी पैदा होने वाली थी। हाँ। और एक देर में पैदा होने वाली, वो शायद नवंबर में तैयार होती थी।
हाँ, हाँ।
लाल बथुआ जो है वो की दाल में अगर जितनी जेठुआ वाली दाल हमारे तुम्हारे चिकनी मानी जाती है। जेठुआ जो है उर्द की दाल, अगर जेठ का उर्द खरीद ले आप तो हमारे दाल में या घी 50 ग्राम न डालो और तब भी वो तुम्हारी दाल चिकनी रखी। एक भदैया उर्द है वो की भकरहिया दाल हो।
या दाल हमारे 12 महीना चुकी रहे कब हूँ, रोटी चाहे भले जौ की होती या बजरा की होती, बाकी ये चीजें कब चुकती नहीं रहे।
Yeah, they're all very small videos. I mean, this is the story they're telling. Today, there are families that are not eating any dal. I mean, that's the transition. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything on Zoom.
One question I have, so you probably noticed during your short visit here in the Twin Cities that there's a really fast growth in micro bakeries, micro restaurants where there's a lot of whole grain being used. They're delivered by bicycle to people's homes. We were talking yesterday about Awamni and all the decolonized cooking there and the whole grains. And so things in a way have flipped. Those who can afford to eat well are eating that kind of whole grain, non-processed food, and then the mass production is what's available at the cheaper price. And so I'm wondering, is that reflected at all in what's happening with India and what you're seeing? And then are there caste restrictions that are somehow impacting some of this return to whole grains?
Great. I think we'll do a round of questions, reflections, and then address them. Yeah. So any other
thoughts? I mean, it doesn't even have to be questions. It's a conversation. So please feel free to. Yeah.
You mentioned, or they mentioned that a lot of grains courses aren't available. Is there an effort by the government or local universities to have libraries of grains historically, or wild grains, like they're collecting seeds, botanists or this sort of thing? Is there anything going on like that in India?
Sure.
Yeah.
So like, this is a question more like from the scientific.
You could also please introduce yourself as.
Actually,
as
we should, maybe.
If you could just say something about.
Certainly. Mahidi Sonasen. I worked at the University of Minnesota for about 30 years in the study abroad office, and was responsible for programs in Rajasthan and then later in Bangalore. That's how I got the chance to know. And so it's a pleasure to be here. I'm now retired, and it's a pleasure to see everyone and participate in the discussion.
Yeah, I'm David Ondich, and I have an interest in India because of friends and family who are of Indian origin. I'm a retired psychiatrist. So. I'm Deepak, I'm a senior research scientist. I'm studying world agriculture. My question was like, in the scientific literature, really, there's a lot of like this discussion about Mediterranean diets and how healthy it is and how we can all shift to that and everything will be fine. When you showed us that picture of the variety of food, I was just wondering, is that diet or the diet of the people in the past who have been forced to transition to rice nowadays, would that be a very healthy diet and compete with the Mediterranean diet so that in my next paper I can raise it?
Please start researching it.
Well,
Yeah.
we can have a conversation. I mean, yes, that's a very good question. I really look forward to talking about that, discussing that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Elizabeth Abraham. I'm a postdoc for the Institute on Environment, and I study more, in terms of the sustainability of agriculture and animal life. And I'm interested to know when you spoke about equity in terms of like the diverse crops that people get, is there anything in relation to the quality? Because I was just thinking about contaminants and stuff that go, is there an equity issue when it comes to the quality of the food that different groups of people get?
Okay. Maybe take these four and then we can have another.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think, sorry, your name was Deepak, right? I think Deepak and Heidi's questions or comments kind of go together because this, whether it's a Mediterranean diet or these micro bakeries, all of these, I mean, not to say it in a negative way because I totally enjoy it, but these are fads, right? These are things that people who have the time, who can engage in it, do spend a lot of time on. And sometimes, I mean, even with the Mediterranean diet, I mean, okay, the point is taken that, so if we say, okay, less processing, don't have red meat every day, have, reduce your intake of red meat, have more fish, have olive oil, but then, just any olive oil, I suppose if you were really doing, a proper Mediterranean diet, you'd have extra virgin olive oil, or you'd have all your, grains and vegetables and fruits, right? But I think the point there really, I mean, what I take from all of that is the processing, really, ultimately. Yeah, diversity. But then again, I mean, does everyone understand a Mediterranean diet? There are. So, okay, sorry. Yeah, I should not.
Yeah, exactly. I was also about that.
Yeah. But what yeah, sorry, I get it.
Your investigation showed like people used to have in the
Yeah, actually, I should say one thing that I thought, and then I'll switch to you. Yeah. So,
but is it healthy enough?
yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we saw when we saw the diversity, we saw the amount of collected food. So Richa Kumar and I got a little excited. Oh wow, this is great. This is wonderful food. They're eating such good food. And Richa Singh actually was warning us. Don't glamorize this thing, because these were people who ate these things because they had nothing else, right? These are people who actually went through hunger, who experienced hunger and deprivation. So they were strong. They did a lot of physical work, manual labor. They did not have the lifestyle diseases that people today have. But then again, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if someone does a study and finds that there are definitely benefits in it, but there's also a lot of culture of hardship and deprivation. So you want to?
Yeah. I have a lot of things.
Of course.
Heidi, I feel that when we look at any food practice, which is not the mainstream, we should encourage it. Whether it is nutritious or not. Frankly, whether it is nutritious or not, if it's not marketed to you, embrace it. Try it out. If you like it, embrace it. If you don't like it, move on. Right? The reason is that food is extremely personal. What I can digest, I'm sure Meda cannot.
We know that.
Meda can digest, I'm sure I cannot. Right? As in, we all have unique bodies. We all have a culture, we have a tradition, which each one of us has come from.
So we should support like ethnic foods in a sense.
Yes, not just ethnic in my ethnic, but any ethnic.
Yeah, like Somali food.
Yes,
Ukrainian
yes,
food.
yes, any day. And the reason I emphasize this point is that The market doesn't want to support that. Right? As if, for various reasons, we can have a longer conversation about that. But the idea here is that only certain foods get mainstreamed because they're aspirational, whether locally or globally. Today, you go to any village in any corner of India, well, not any corner, most corners of India, you will find chow-mein, you will find burger, you will find pasta.
In a village.
And,
Yes.
yeah.
And pizza sometimes too.
Pizza too, pizza. Pizza milta hai apne yahan, pizza. So I'm not trying to trivialize this here. The point that I'm trying to make here is that when we look at foods, we have to look at it in the context that Sudha is sharing of who cultivated these things and how did it grow and what are the stories behind it. And if you think about, I mean, growing up, and I've heard it from not just the Indian cultures, but other places too, there are a lot of stories about how certain food items came to us, how certain, it might be fairy tales, it might very well be fiction, but stories, lived histories, culture, right? Identity. When we go after any diet, and here I'm segueing into your question, as a healthy, nutritious, ideal diet, we are essentially, doing, what was that Dr. Seuss book where they chop off all the trees and
Lorax.
Lorax, right? We are doing the Lorax on all these food histories, all these cultures, all these stories, all these traditions, all these identities, right? So, where Mediterranean food is great for people living in the Mediterranean, right? I'm not saying if you are here, you only eat Native American food, because you're not living the Native American life. You are living the life of today in this context. So what would your food preferences be? You have to work it out, right? We have de-skilled people when it comes to food. Don't worry about food. Just study for your engineering, for your doctorate, for your PhD, for your whatever. You will get food, whatever you will be able to survive, which is true. We have all survived. But then what is lost, right? So the idea of what is the best food has to be decided by each individual. I mean, no offense meant to your academic pursuits. Please do write what is the most nutritious one. But I would simultaneously say, put a line at the bottom somewhere or in between somewhere that just because it's the most nutritious doesn't mean you do this every time, all the time, or wherever you are, right? The best food is seasonal food for the place that you are.
Yeah.
And you can't do that all the time, all over the year, all through the year, right? I mean, in Minnesota winters, you can't say that I'm only going to eat seasonal foods. I mean, if you can, that would be amazing, but not everyone can.
I mean, we have that cranberry chutney at the back.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So good, please.
So we went through Wisconsin on Monday, and we picked apples and bought cranberries, locally grown cranberries, and we just cooked all that stuff yesterday. So there's some cranberry chutney. So the thing is, I mean, after coming, when I lived here, most of the time we didn't use tamarind. Why should we use tamarind? I mean, we have cranberry, we have rhubarb, we have, lots of other things, right? So, just adapt, right? Shiny, one of our friends, some of you would know her. So she makes this preparation with celery and moong dal, right? The green gram. And it kind of reminds us of the banana stem and moong dal recipe from South India. But it's with celery, because celery is what grows here. So, adapt. Your question about whether things are being preserved. So I was trying to find out something about wild rice, because there was wild rice in Sitapur district. There were extensive wetlands there. And the most information I found was from an agricultural scientist who said that they used that the genomes from wild rice were added to some rice variety because this is hardy, right? So I think the scientists, I mean, there's a lot of this information with scientists, but agricultural scientists, but with a specific viewpoint.
Okay.
There are people who are collecting, who are preserving these things. There's a scientist in Odisha who's got a living lab of some 2,000 varieties of paddy. People creating seed banks. So
There are, for example, in medicine, you have medical ethnobotanists who go to the jungles or all over, and they collect plants or seeds.
And yes, there's the apple cobbler also.
Yeah, so when we talk of seasonal foods and other things, I mean, preserving was very much part of every food culture. Whether it is the Native American, whether it is the Central Americans, whether it is the African, various African traditions, or the South Asian and the East Asian. And everywhere you look at food histories, they talk about preserving food for later in the season. There would be a certain way you would store grains, there would be certain vegetables that you would dry, there would be certain meats that you would cure and keep, right? So this idea of, oh, what do we do in winters? I mean, you preserve and you ride through the winter. And like Sudha was mentioning earlier, I would just like to tie that threads, a few loose ends there as well. When we look at processing, it's not just with machines. A lot of processing was done manually, but that processing was not one of equity, right? There were certain either women, gender, or caste, or economic oppressive relationships there, which exploitative oppressive relationships there, which resulted in a better food security for a few and not so good, but still something so that they will survive the hard times, right? You do want the labor to live and serve you for the next generation or two. So there was an oppressive relationship there. Now, in trying to right that equity, actually, we haven't even tried to right that wrong. We have just gone from that oppressive relationship to one where the markets are given full control of our food systems. And we are essentially at the mercy of global markets where neither the producer nor the consumer, and I would even say even the traders in between, they do not determine the price at which these items are transacted. So what are we talking about food as a right? If we recognize, and we all recognize, all countries of the world, almost all countries of the world, recognize that everybody has a right to life. Once we say we have a right to life, then we are talking about a right to food. In some form or the other, we do recognize right to food. But then, how does that translate into action? It has become a welfare thing.
Oh, and it's become technocratic.
Technocratic too.
It's become food fortification.
Yeah. It's taken the form of food fortification. Why? Because the markets can see a benefit in telling governments that, hey, you need this micronutrient. I mean, we have a saying that, the elephant was running through and they caught the mouse and said, I caught the thief, I caught the thief. Right? So there's huge, like, I think you did mention that about proteins, right?
No, I haven't really.
Oh, you haven't yet.
That.
Yeah.
I keep talking.
Anyway, you had a question, or you wanted to share something.
My name is Sushma Reddy, and I'm in fishery wildlife and conservation biology and museum. I have a very different focus for biodiversity issues. But I have a question about that later. But I was continuing on with what you were saying about, if there's something you like, and especially if it's not mainstream, you should support it. I really like that sentiment. And I was thinking about, now that the millet fad, there is this like resurgence. My family's from Bangalore actually, and they there's a lot of interest in different varieties of millets that were used in the past coming back into their food culture now. I'm just wondering how the economics of that changes what rural communities are doing, because they weren't mass produced.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely question. There's a lot of stories there. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I forgot what it was, but.
Yeah.
I'm David Faust. I'm the librarian for South Asia here at the university. And I've been interested in rural issues in India for many decades. And also have family. So anyway, I was kind of interested in hearing a little bit more about the non-cultivated things that people get access to. And has that changed, in what ways do those help their status, and in what ways have those changed over the years?
Sure.
Yeah. Great insights. Yeah, my name is Vishal. I'm with the foundation. My question is, I'm really struck by what Sudha said, is that the linkage between say, caste, geography, and food. So, because we generally tend to kind of put together poor, marginalized, oppressed in one kind of a word, but like even if we take Dalit and Adivasis, there's a different kind of distribution. Like you still have access to land, especially mining international India, whereas Adivasis and boats are at times the landlords of that region. The Dalits would work for own farmers, landlords. In that case, the relationship is not quite linear, right? Because Dalits are working for them, they get the food access to whatever is being given to them, or they buy from the market. Whereas Adivasis can still have access to our land. So I was trying to understand how do you see this? Has there been any change across the years amongst these two, especially if you can add more?
And I just have a question. The opposite also happens other places where Adivasis are, I'm asking, I don't know, where Adivasis are working from.
I am not aware of it. Okay. That's what I said. My limited interaction in Central India and states, I would not see that as a case. And generally, kind of the data says that the leads have mostly been families. The proportion is quite high, even compared to Adivasis.
This is informative to me.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
So,
I'm not aware.
and just want to also repeat Anu's question. Anu, thank you for being here. So Anu Mandavili has joined us from California and asks, what time periods are the farmers referring to when they talk about the past?
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Can we hear Anu if she talks or not? Anu, can you speak?
You can unmute and.
Yeah, that was just a question, and
Awesome.
just referring
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was specifically referring to the farmers in the video, because they kept talking about we used to grow XYZ and so on. And I was wondering, given that the Green Revolution has been in place for at least 50 years, I would say, right? If not a little bit more. So what period are they referring to when they talk about the past? I was curious about that.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So, okay. The uncultivated foods that David, you were asking about, they complemented, they supplemented what people were eating, right? So, and they were what was growing at that time and what was available. So, one category is the stuff that they. So also, when we were researching this thing, we found that we were doing all these literature searches and we found bits and pieces. We didn't find the whole picture because there's the foods that you collect from commons, right? From forests, from wetlands, from lakes and rivers, right? Which are common lands. Then there is the food that you collect from fields, from cultivated fields. So it could be, your edible beets. it could also be things like chane ka saag, which is the gram plant in the greens of that plant in January, maybe up to February when it's tender. People cut that and consume it, and most farmers didn't mind because they did not take that much, and then they only harvested the gram, not the leaves. So there are those kinds of things. Then there was the donated foods. So you see that in, the biggest example for us was buttermilk. Okay, and all of this that I'm talking about is about Sitapur. The story changes across the country, so I'll just stick to this place because this is where I have a more extensive understanding. So buttermilk is a byproduct of the ghee making process. Ghee is clarified butter, and because there was no market for fresh milk, right? Before the dairy system, before these cooperative dairy system, where today you have a liter of milk at home, you can sell it because this collection centers are so extensive across the country. You'll find some place to sell that milk very, but in this region, those dairies only started in the 90s. So up to the 80s, I mean even into the early 90s, what you see is that people with a lot of milk, especially those who reared buffaloes, they had all this milk, they would convert it into ghee. And then they had this buttermilk. And so much buttermilk. I mean, how much buttermilk can you consume? So it was a donated food. And then you start looking at the literature and you find that there were these relationships, right? The poor expected the landlord to give them buttermilk. It was one of those, and this story, this story I read from Haryana, which is another part of North India, where someone is describing this line outside the landlord's house and everyone collecting buttermilk and going home. So, there are those donated foods. So, even today, we were just discussing, you have a zucchini plant at home, you're not going to be able to eat all that zucchini, you're going to distribute that zucchini.
Our friend was saying, in summers we try to roll up our windows so that we don't have any zucchini dropped into our car in the neighborhood.
So you had all those kinds of, so, uncultivated foods span this, and things like greens. Oh, and we are talking about plant food, but the animals, the fish, it's amazing how much fish people in Sitapur ate, all the meat eating communities. Sometimes they just eat fish because they had nothing else at home. So they just eat fish. So fish, small game, hares, porcupines, small white dogs.
Yeah,
all
all
wild.
wild.
All wild. So someone just put it to me, anyone can hunt a hare in a sugarcane field. Who cares? Like, you go into someone's sugarcane field and you're hunting a hare, they're not going to stop you.
They'll like it.
Yeah, they'll like it. And so rats, people don't talk about it, but yeah.
And just a quick thing, when we talk of uncultivated foods, it's become a thing to talk about herbs and medicinal value and tubers and greens and all that. But if you think about it, the largest uncultivated foods are actually not the flora but the fauna. And today, especially if you see, let's
Sushma and Vishal.
Yes.
And Anu.
Anu was asking about the timeline. So Anu, we did. If you go to the portal, we've tried to sort of trace the timelines. But broadly, I'll say in this region, the big farmers started green revolution methods in the 70s. But for the small and marginal farmers, well into the 90s, they did not switch to green revolution crops because they did not have access to irrigation. So what really changed ultimately was plastic pipes. Today, they draw plastic pipes up to 1 kilometer. Just insane, because it just collapses, right?
It's those flexible plastic ones which you roll up into a bundle and store. And when you want water, you just lay it from wherever the water source is to your field. Across streets and everything, you just dig up about this much wide, that deep, and you lay your pipe and cover mud on it. And vehicles will go over it if it's if it's a heavy vehicle that might go, they'll put a plank over it, and they run it for kilometers, almost a kilometer many a time.
And in fact, some of the conversion to sugarcane has actually happened after the stray cattle problem. Because
Could you talk a little bit about that?
We'll come to that.
I'll share the
It's
article on the
5:30, so
wire,
we
right?
still
I'll
have-
share the article on the wire because I think that's.
But maybe just like, you can summarize the problem
Yes.
so that.
Okay.
We'll come to
Yeah,
that,
we
but
can
there
have
are other questions that we can.
The
Sushma?
caste and the geography,
Yes.
and Sushma asked about millets. Yeah, I can take that.
Both of them, I can talk.
Okay, caste and geography, I'll just say that, so the Sangathan is predominantly Dalits, but there are two Dalit castes. And there are untouchability practices between these two castes, right? So
Both of whom are Dalit.
right? So, I mean, hierarchies, and in fact, many people in that part of the country feel that Parsis are not Dalits, right? There's a so, I mean, if you look at the history of the Parsi community, they were actually hunting and fishing, well up to 40, 50 years ago. I mean, whatever I've read of their lifestyle, they have a little more Adivasi kind of stories. But then I guess they got settled way before. So, this whole classification, this caste classification, these are SC, these are ST, like the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. I mean, that itself is so complicated.
And administrative.
And administrative. So, so when we talk about Western Awadh, we've actually listed out castes in some of our papers saying, these are the Savarna castes, the dominant castes. These are the intermediate castes, and these are the Dalit castes, and some of the Muslim castes. I mean, we've not gone into too much detail on the Muslim castes, but there too you see, you see the Pathans and the Zamindar, the landlord kind of Muslims who actually are not very different from the Savarna Hindus. The only thing being they're like the meat eating. So you have the Thakurs who are meat eating dominant caste, and you have the Zamindari type Muslims, and then you have the artisan levels. So in any part of the country or all of South Asia, I suppose, you have to really understand the hierarchies there.
The
local hierarchies. So what you will see is with the two Dalit castes there, the Parsis some of the Parsis were actually as powerful as the intermediate castes. So they got land in the land reforms of the 50s. So in the 50s, post-independence, what land reform did is give land to the cultivator. So those were the people who had the documents, right? Who had the land in their name or cultivator rights. So those were mostly the dominant, intermediate, and some Dalits. So depending on, I mean, it's almost case by case. But then in general, you will see the Chamars or the Raidas are disadvantaged. If they had land, it was bad land. The untouchability practices.
In fact, Sitapur is actually a Savarnization of Chitapur, which is from Chita Pasi, Chita Pasi, who was a leader, a very charismatic person who mobilized and challenged the powers and actually established that as a.
I mean, it was actually that the Parsis were powerful before the Rajputs came.
Correct.
So, I mean, so you have this, I mean, it's actually a churning, but coming to the geography, so geography matters because if they were close to the forest, if they were close to the river, if they were close to wetlands, they had different stories. So that's the geography part of it, or the kind of land, or a particular time in history. Groundnut cultivation took off in this area in the 50s and 60s. And at that time, this sandy soils, which was supposed to be the worst part of the region, became prosperous. So laborers from the fertile areas would come to the sandy soils to work. So, you also have this, so it's, I guess it's history also. So it's caste, geography, history, gender, of course. I mean, gender is everywhere. That is a chapter in itself. So, but then, I mean, meat eating. You see that women eat less because they have less access to meat. They have less access to the more nutritious foods. So that's across all castes.
The point that Vishal and Lina were talking about is actually very well seen and segueing or building on what Sudha mentioned. In Odisha, I worked with a community in Muniguda, which is in Raigada district, the southernmost The
Niyamgiri struggle.
Niyamgiri hills, you might have heard about the Niyamgiri struggle. Muniguda is the nearest, urban center or the railway station to go to the Niyamgiris. So in that area, the Adivasis are completely against the Dalits in the local area, primarily because the traders were the Reddys and the the Banya class from Andhra who would come in, and they would set up in Muniguda and such places. They would not go out into the hills. They would recruit the local Dalits to do the extractions and the collections and all that, and make the payments also intentionally, because they did not want to get into the mess. They would put them against each other, and that dynamics exists even to this day. So where Adivasi farmers are actually exploited by the Dalit trader agents, right? And therefore we see where, I mean, you were asking about, is there, so yes, there is a very it's not even, we can't say Dalit and Adivasi have the same lived histories, not at all. In many cases, in almost all cases, I would say, Dalits have the worst end of the deal in most situations. But just to highlight one other example of where things don't necessarily follow the same narrative, but it is still at the end of the day a very exploitative, oppressive relationship between different communities. And like when we were talking about SC/ST and how these classification, it was not meant for, the British did not do all these classifications for equity purposes. Their objective was very clear. They wanted to classify things so that they could exploit the most out of that region. And that was their objective. And yes, we did have a very strong identity politics that emerged because of that. And that, like many other things that came out of colonialism, that's probably one of the better things. So I wouldn't say that, it's useless to do such things or that it is a British construct or anything like that. But we have to see these dynamics, like Sudha was saying, in the local context, as to who was trying to get the better of who in these interactions. Sushma's question was about whether these resurgence in millets has led to any significant difference in economic prosperity. Well, yes and no. No, because, okay, first let me put the yes forward. Farmers who hold marginal lands are typically Dalits. Typically, even if they're not Dalit, the poorer among in their communities. And they have invariably been able to get some better deal than what they got earlier. Nowhere near what a sugarcane farmer or a paddy farmer can get, but they are getting a better deal than what they were getting earlier. But what does that translate to? So we had a sudden burst in demand for brown top millet. It's a kind of millet which is extremely hardy and grows very easily and all that. And this was in just before the pandemic, 18, 19, there was a surge.
Oh, even in 16, 17, it started picking up.
It started picking up, but 17, 18, the market boomed. And we had large scale cultivation, like sowing was so high. The seeds were going at like 10 times the price for sowing. And then because the market was fetching them about 60 rupees a kilo for the grain, and 6,000 rupees a quintal. And that's
just in comparison with say paddy.
Yeah, paddy, I don't even want to compare to paddy because paddy is a very different ball game altogether.
This is for millet.
This is for one particular kind of millet, where they would have otherwise got anywhere from 1,000 to 1,300 rupees per quintal. They were getting about 6,000 rupees per quintal. So sowing was expensive. And what happened? Predictably, markets crashed. To the extent that it crashed to below the price that they were getting earlier. Right? So that's why I keep emphasizing this point about garbage in, garbage out. Unless you change the system, whether you cultivate millets, you cultivate paddy, you cultivate quinoa, you do whatever you want. Unless you change the system of price identification, price discovery, how are things going to change? Why will there be a different outcome? Yes, temporarily, there might be a sudden thing where some farmers might get landfall profit. And that's what we see with crops like tomato. In places like Chintamani, another place where we work, its groundwater is like 2,000, 2,500 feet below ground level, water level. They dig tube wells that deep. But they cultivate tomato, which is a water intensive crop. Why? And tomato prices, you would have seen from news reports over the years, regularly they crash. But they also occasionally peak. And when it peaks, it's a landfall, it's a lottery. And just like people are stuck to lotteries and addicted to playing the lottery, farmers are like, look, it's okay if I suffer 3 years. That 1 year, if I hit that jackpot, I'll be able to build a new house. I'll be able to get my daughter married. They're not looking to build a palace or anything, but it's that desire for that, right? So there are real world changes that we are seeing in some of these communities. And the no is because of this one reason. And the second reason is we are talking about very small steps. Very, very, very small steps. Even today, with all that has happened, with all the popularity of millets, the effective sown area of millets has gone down. It has not gone up. It has gone down. Because the extent to which soybean and corn and various other cash crops are being pushed is phenomenal. So we work on these things and we like to read about these things, and of course algorithms will push such news to you. So we feel that there's a lot happening here, but what is really happening is that the sown area has gone down. Yeah, so that you wanted to say something.
No, I just wanted to bring in that ground top millet story. Yeah, I'll just do that and then so I mean, also, why did the demand for brown top millet grow? People just started looking at all these nutrition tables, and brown top millet looked like the most nutritious thing. And everyone wants to know, what is the most nutritious thing? I mean, why can't you eat 3 or 4 varieties of millets? No, what is the most nutritious? So everyone started zeroing in on brown top millet. Now, in 2015, there was a severe drought across a lot of parts of India. This region called Bundelkhand, which is a dry region, a drought-prone region. So it's like southern Uttar Pradesh and northern Madhya Pradesh. It's, I mean, again, rich history, rich culture, all of that stuff. So there was a lot of coverage of the hunger people were facing in that region. And there were news reports about ghas ki roti, right? Roti made of grass, and how people were forced to eat ghas ki roti. I mean, it was well intentioned. There were some activists, including Yogendra Yadav, who went there, documented the whole thing. People were really suffering, not to minimize the suffering. But then this ghas ki roti became this big, flashpoint. This is ghas ki roti. So what they were eating was a grain called fikar. So, yeah, fikar, which is brown top millet.
And in that same period, brown top millet in the Bangalore markets was commanding about 160, 200 rupees a kilo.
Hey, and by the next year it reached 400 rupees.
Yeah.
400 rupees a kilo for brown top millet rice. And people there, I mean, it's also built up, right? Like, we are forced to eat ghas ki roti. That was a drought food. That was a famine food. And it's extremely hardy. Now, what happened? I mean, that was actually the point where Richa Kumar and I started talking. I mean, we wanted to go there and investigate that Bundelkhand story, but we didn't have good grassroots presence. But so that in Sitapur, in Awadh, is called Jarua Kadana. I mean, it's maybe 500 kilometers distance, but it's got a different name. It's called Jarua Kadana. So when this whole 400 rupees per kilo was happening, I mean, I was showing all our sathis, look, this is the rate. Why don't we collect this? Nobody wanted to grow it. They all said, oh, it just comes up on its own. So we said, fine, it comes up on its own, let's collect it. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talked to about it that time. He collect. And they all said, yeah, we'll collect 10 kilos, we'll collect 20 kilos, we'll collect 100 kilos. At the harvest time, not a grain was got. And after doing this research, I mean, I just feel that it's the sentiment associated with this. Right? Such an inferior grain. This was what the poorest of the poor ate. You know, one village was where people talked about eating this, and their story is such a story of deprivation. I mean, it's just, even today, it's that village is really deprived. So those were the people who were eating this grain. So, I mean, you know, even when people were saying, yes, we'll collect this, they didn't really want to collect it. So, yeah, that was the other side of the brown top millet story.
Shiny is waiting to ask a question. Lina, Aisha, okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah,
I'm Lina, by the way. I work with Association for India's Development, which works with SKs. But my question is, do millets have MSP? And in a sense, you're saying then if crops have MSP, all crops, tomatoes, have MSP.
I have a bunch of clarification questions.
Isha, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Isha and I'm from Environmental Geography. I'm a grad student. So my first question is, when you said, like towards the end of the video, you said that they don't eat dal anymore. I don't know if I heard you right or.
I said that after the video.
Yeah, I think so. I'm curious to know, is the consumption of lentils going down, and if so, why? To know what explains that shift. Second, I think I have this at the back of my mind, and then I think groundwater came out. So I wanted to understand with regard to irrigation, just curious if, given this dry land climate, is groundwater still a significant source, or are there sources of irrigation outside of that? And also, again, this is perhaps a bit presumptuous, but is there also difference with regard to how people construct water? The quality of groundwater, because I mean, I come from Delhi, but I've done work in urban villages and also some other parts of Rajasthan. It usually gets seen as superior because it's meetha pani. So I'm just curious if there is any such construction with regard to where you do your work in Sitapur. And I think my final question is sort of connecting a few other things that came up, but you touched upon diversity during your presentation, but also during some of the questions. And so I'm keen to learn what is that diversity with regard to the cropping pattern, and if you could talk a bit more about that. And how do you see that? Because at some point you mentioned we should not overly romanticize that diversity. And again, my understanding, which is very limited, coming from a class on dryland agriculture I did way back in my master's, is that diversity with the cropping is essentially a survival strategy. So let's not celebrate this as resilience, but it's a survival strategy that is sort of very local. So how do you see that? I'm curious to know what are those crops locally, and what does marketization then do to all these strategies of survival?
Do you want to take Shiny, Mubina, both? Shiny, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Sure, I can.
Okay.
So my name is Shiny Verghese, and I work with the local organization, Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Unfortunately, my camera is not working, so I'm just asking this question. Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Dwiji and Sudha. It is a really extremely thoughtful reflections on the politics of food. Thank you so much. First is an open question about some of our own work. It's about the somewhat extractive relation we end up developing with those who have been nurturing traditional food system. I'm just thinking about how once the quinoa went global, Indian farmers started, marketing it and eating less of their own traditional food. Especially when such foods are incorporated into corporate value chains, it becomes problematic. So, to what extent is this happening in India, and with the focus to export away a lot of the traditional foods? What kind of safeguards are being considered apart from fair trade or something like that? That's one question. But it's something which is kind of an open question for all of us to reflect on. But more importantly, my question is, could you share a bit about the intersection of politics of food with the politics of Hindutva? I just want to go in a little bit. I asked because there is this zero budget farming. For those who are not familiar with it, said be enough. There is an emphasis of not using agrochemicals and using agricultural inputs generated locally with a focus on cow dung, cow urine, milk products, etc. And of course, because cow is considered a holy animal by Hindus, some of the practitioners emphasize it as traditional. So, of course, this emphasis of tradition is coming from a different perspective from what you both are talking about. But I was wondering, given you are working on the ground, what is your experience? And if you can reflect on it, that will be extremely helpful. Thank you.
Should I go first?
Yeah, go. I
So,
mean,
Mubina,
just
can
put
we
this
take
up.
your, or do you want to throw it in your
Yeah,
go ahead.
Thank you, Shiny, for the last question. My question is around that only.
Introduce
I'm
yourself.
Mubina Qureshi. I'm Executive Director at SEWA AIFW. It's a non-profit organization serving South Asian diaspora in Minnesota. And my question was just very close to what Shiny was asking about, the political intervention when it comes to food and food choices, and specifically when Sudha was mentioning about it's still stuck like "Mera namak khaya hai to you have vote me." So what are those challenges and barriers that you face, and like on communal level as well, like Muslims versus Hindu majoritarian upper caste people, or like coming from those jamindars or those people, and like also the nationalist and very Hindu agenda forcing vegetarianism in
Thank you. Yeah.
the regions.
Yeah.
So what are some of the barriers and challenges?
Good.
Actually,
Sudha has really done.
That's why I said let's Sudha say it first. Go
Okay.
first.
How do I share this on the screen? Yeah.
Or it needs to start up.
Okay.
Oh,
This is please go to the wire. You just search Gauraksha, I suppose. It's in my name. It was a collective work, but I mean, they wanted a name on it. So
individual.
yeah, they wanted an individual name. But I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that I can say right now is really covered in that. So maybe I should go backwards.
Yeah, I see I'm a bad guy.
So you would ask Sushma, right? No.
So we had Lina, Isha, Shiny, Mubina.
Mubina. Okay, Mubina. Sir. So Mubina, you were asking about this whole ZDNF and natural farming, all these various variants. So, I mean, those who follow Subhash Palekar swear by the indigenous cow. I mean, and you will find people who will talk as if it's it's a different species. The desi guy is the the mother, and all the dung that's generated. I mean, that's the dung and the urine. I mean, that is all powerful. The good news is that see, animal waste is important, but this whole thing about the indigenous cow, I mean, I think it's overblown. I think Vijay will have more to say. But a lot of people are exploring buffalo, goat, chicken feed, all of those things. So and people make stuff with fish, like they take all this waste products from fish or fish markets and ferment it and add it to the fields. So there is openness. Yes, there are cow adherents. So there are big drives in Uttar Pradesh of obviously Gau Adharit Kheti, right? Cow-based agriculture. Now, in 2017, when the BJP government came to power in Uttar Pradesh, they cracked down on illegal abattoirs. Now, I mean, the thing about illegality, I'm sure all of you who've thought about this or worked in India, I mean, what is legal, what is illegal? So many people drive around without a license, without a driving license. And then I ask people, okay, why didn't you get your license? And then they explain to me the whole process, how complicated it is. Yeah, obviously, you're not going to, I mean, we'll have to get a group of people, we'll have to advocate for them and get them all licenses. We've tried to do that a couple of times in Sitapur. We just not managed to get everyone together at the same time, but it's very hard to get a driver's license. So most people are operating without a license. So when the police want to crack down, the field is rife. So they crack down on abattoirs and basically, cow slaughter was already outlawed, but they enforced it. So now what you see is farmers abandoning their cattle. And I mean, the official statement always is that farmers are doing this, and people have internalized it. Humne hi kiya. We have created this problem. And my question is, what are you rearing a cow or a buffalo for? Okay, buffalo trade still continues, but what are you rearing a cow for? For the milk. When is it going to produce milk? When it has a calf. 12 to 14 months is the interval between for cows to calf. Now 50% chance that it's a male calf. There's no use for a male calf any longer. Once upon a time, bulls were prized more than cows because of all the work that they did in agriculture. Today, bulls have no value, right? So you have a male calf. What do? Even if you have a female calf, in 5 to 6 years, you started with one cow and now you have 5 cattle, 6. You just have your one cow shed. How are you going to fit them in there? So what you have is people abandoning their cattle. And some of the small marginal farmers we work with, there's some of them are like, I abandoned this cow, she came back. I abandoned her again, she came back. There are these kinds of stories. But there are also stories of people abandoning 10, 15, 100, right? I mean, this is going to happen. Now, what are those stray cattle going to do? They need to eat. They're going to attack your fields. So the funny thing is that the switch that you see to sugarcane is as much driven by the price of sugarcane as by the need to grow something that the cattle won't eat, won't graze.
Oh my God. but that is no longer true. Both people are there. Because cattle don't find anything else, they have started eating sugarcane as well.
I mean, but you still can. I suppose you can say that you invest in. They've banned barbed wire now.
Yeah.
So I mean, everything you
They
just
banned barbed wire?
Because the cattle were getting
cut. They were getting into it. I mean, barbed wire, they were trying to jump, they would get a cut and get gangrene. And
yeah. So, Shani, your question about politics of food and politics of Hindutva in UP, the biggest thing is the stray cattle. I mean, everyone identifies it as a problem, but because the main solution is off the table, then all these other things are discussed, right? They'll talk about cow shelters, gaushala, and they'll say, we'll accommodate all the cows. They'll build something for 100 cows, and then they'll say they'll not take the steers. So these are bulls which haven't been castrated. When you use them for agricultural work, farmers castrated them. These are not castrated. These are aggressive animals.
Yes,
I have been chased by, sand. I think all of us who have gone to rural UP have encountered a sand, right? People have died. One of our sathis went to his own cattle shed. He didn't go onto the road or something. He went to his own cattle shed. There was a sand there which gored him. His intestines all spilled out. He's fine now, but I mean, and people have just accepted it. The anger of 2017, 2019. I mean, people really farmers were out protesting. They were pushing stray cattle into schools, into public institutions. Cases were filed against them. I mean, people were just silenced. And so now you can't talk about it, or most people don't protest about it. It's a problem out there. Yeah, I mean, there are some local equations, some understandings. I mean, obviously there are less stray cattle than one would expect. So there are things happening, but it's very risky. The vegetarianism. So you find Dalits who have become vegetarian, right? And there's this Jai Gurudev movement, which a lot of our sathis, the ones who have turned vegetarian, they follow this Jai Gurudev movement, and their diets are abysmal. You were asking about pulses. So the consumption survey that we did in 2017, we did across 4 seasons. So we wanted to get a complete picture. What happens with all the national surveys? They go and do, one sample, and then they ask what they ate in the last 30 days. I mean, you try to write down what you ate in the last 30 days. Some of the newer schedules do ask 7 days, but even that, you'll just talk about the highlights, right? The main things, the grains. You're not going to talk about that, a bowl full of raspberries you had 4 days ago, right? So, I mean, we felt that we needed to have a more thorough kind of data collection. So what we did is 3 non-consecutive days. So went on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in 4 times during the year. So we have 12 data points for each family. We surveyed some 100 families. The protein consumption is alarming. It's so low. I mean, it's not enough for people to sustain themselves. We have at least 20-30 families who during those 12 days did not have any food which is a significant protein source. Like if you just have a little bit of milk in tea, you're not counting it as a protein source. So either you have 250 ml of milk, or you have pulses, or you have groundnuts, or something like that, or meat and fish or eggs. They didn't have anything those 12 days. So what you often hear nutritionists saying is that poor families in India are getting their protein from wheat, right? So that is what it has boiled down to today. I mean, and why have people stopped eating dal? It's been a process, right? So people didn't eat this much potato even 30 years ago. In this region, you have old people saying, just eat potatoes occasionally. And now there's nothing but potato. Aloo ki sabji, aloo ki sabji, aloo ki sabji, right? So they'll either have roti with aloo ki sabji, or rice with aloo ki sabji, or they'll have some, packaged foods, or there's no protein. Dal. So what happened is, Dwiji mentioned, right, that we become a pulse importing country. So there have been these price shocks, right? Sometime in the 2008 period, I think, the price of tur dal just shot up. So when you have these price shocks, people stop eating the food. And when the price drops, they've got used to not eating it. So they continue not eating it. So after successive price shocks, people just stop eating it. Milk, dairy consumption, people are monetizing it because they have to pay for fodder, right? They have to maintain their cattle. There aren't any open pasture lands where they can graze their cattle for free today. They have to buy fodder. Fodder is super expensive. So they monetize the milk, right? So they're not eating protein. They're getting by without protein. So they've got used to living without protein consumption. Was that all the you can?
My question.
The MSP thing he will address.
Okay. So when it comes to vegetarianism and millets, and unfortunately millets have become the sattvic food. The food of the and there's also a history to that. I mean, it doesn't come out of thin air. Because these are uncultivated foods, considered uncultivated to an extent, they're also considered vrat ka cham, the food that you can eat even when you're fasting. So the definitions of fasting are as diverse as the people and the practices. So in some places, fasting means you don't eat anything, including not even drinking water, right? But in many community, it just means that you don't eat certain foods. And in most places, it just means that you don't eat your regular foods. So in South India, there is a festival that is, I mean, it's celebrated across India, but in South India, the way it's celebrated is that Mahashivratri, that's the whatever, it's one festival. They're supposed to fast through the day and the night and then break their fast in the morning. But what it has translated to is that you don't eat rice, but you make upma, you make everything else, and make all these sweets and distribute it to people and eat yourself too. But it's called fasting. So this Vratka chawal, millets as banyan millet especially, is considered as a fasting food. So because of that history, now when people are taking to millets, they are looking at it as a sattvic food.
Okay.
But then if you, I mean, from the conversations itself, you would have figured out that it's actually the Dalits and the Adivasis that have actually saved these foods for today. Save these varieties, continue to cultivate them. So by they are not sattvic, and the food culture that these grains have or are part of are very much, meat eating cultures. So and actually, if you start cooking and eating them, we have this thing in South Interior Karnataka where they say that kal saru and ragi mudde, right? It is kalu. Kalu means leg, like chicken, right? Chicken legs. But it has become kalu, which is, pulses. The whole lentils. The whole lentils, which is also cooked and made into this curry. So kalu has become kalu and got quote unquote gentrified or sattvikized to become the sattvic food of kal saru and ragi mudde. No, it is kal saru. It's chicken, sambar. So it's very intricately linked. Millets and non-vegetarian foods are intricately linked. And one of the things that we keep emphasizing is you may not want to eat meat, but let us recognize that there is this history. I mean, it's not that one particular community or one family or one tradition owns the rights to how something can be made or eaten. But that doesn't mean that we, discount and override that history that is there, that culture that is there. With regard to MSP, the idea of MSP is again administrative, right? Because we are looking at food systems from a very, I would say, limited perspective of production when we are looking at MSP. You are ensuring a minimum support price to the farmer, that's well and good. But in providing that MSP, certain crops are being favored against everything else, right? So would providing MSP for every crop be useful? Yes, but is it practical? No. So what does it mean? Well, irrespective of what you grow, if you're a farmer, just as we say that there is a employment guarantee for the working classes, we should be looking at, there are calls for this to happen in the urban context, where MNRGA is only for rural districts. That a similar employment guarantee should be there for urban districts, and this is not coming from some left-wing think tank or anything. It's coming from the industry. Who was it? Mahindra. Anand or one of his various. Anand Mahindra himself. Yeah. He said that it's time that we start talking about an urban employment guarantee act, because industry is not finding labor the way they wanted it, and they want an into this secure labor force and various other things. So
consumer demand is dropping.
Consumer demand is also dropped, right? So unless people have money to spend.
Industry not finding labor, I didn't know it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a challenge. because they are competing against rock bottom, right? They don't want to pay the wages that people can earn. I mean, that's a different, we'll come to that. We'll come to that. So idea of MSP is good in the short run. There is a transitionary mechanism, but we have to go beyond looking at food systems from a production only perspective. We have to look at how it is processed, how it is traded, and how it is consumed as well. Shiny had one question that I thought I should ask.
About the politics of digital.
No, before that, she asked about. Shiny, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, what was it that I wanted to answer?
Yeah, that's about the, like somewhat extractive relation we end up having, developing with those who have been producing food systems.
Yes. So the idea of supply chains and how traditional foods, when they become marketized, become commodities of the market, how it goes out of reach of producer communities, 100%. And that's market is not interested in how the producer community fares or even the consumer community fares. They are only interested in meeting a certain demand, maybe even generating a demand, creating a demand, and then meeting the demand so that they can meet their bottom line. So I'll actually just so one of the things that I have been working on, and I shouldn't say we have been working on, is in developing ways in which we can process grains that such a process is accessible to the producer community as well. So what you see here is among the best quality, not among the, it is one of the best quality millet rice that you can get in the market, and this is the quality that we can get. From here itself, you can see how much difference in color there is. The darker the color of a particular rice is, the more bran is retained in it, right? And you would remember this from the red rice and the brown rice and all that, right? So similarly, so already, I mean, I should have got the thing that's available in the market here in Minneapolis, because that is white.
White, it is white.
It is white, and what I have given there are 2 samples, the better of the lot from the market. So we are trying to develop these, not trying to develop, we have developed, it is working in 6 different places, and now we are trying to get this into a kind of a formula, but not really a formula, because I don't believe in this rubber stamp modeling of method of
Again, I should.
But we have to work on reskilling communities to be able to, when I was talking earlier about the whole, reworking.
That's one of
yeah. So this is, these are some of our sathis in Sitapur, Shanti Didi, Papu Bhaiya, Ajit. They are using a machine to remove stones from the grains, and it's part of 4 or 5 machines. Thoda aur bhi honge na?
Yeah.
This is another one. Can you go to
I don't have any photos. I'm not good at
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I have this photo.
Yeah. That's okay. So we have developed this process, these machines, adapted them, and we are able to do it such that a farmer who or a family that brings in 10 or 20 kgs of grains can get it processed and take it back for their consumption. And the idea is that, like what Shani was asking, we don't want the market to dictate these things. We would like that these commodities are local commodities. I mean, there's no way in today's world we can say we won't work with the market. We have to engage with the market, but we have to engage with it on our terms. And that's what we are trying to do through these initiatives. So the millet.org, THEMILLET.org, that's where a lot of this, that's more the technical stuff that is over there. A lot of the political stuff that I'm talking about, I haven't really put up over there. I should update the website with that information as well. But you'll find more information about what we mean by community-oriented processing rather than a market-oriented processing.
Yeah, I have a question that is related to that, but were there any others?
I think there was a question about the mixed cultivation that I just wanted to say. You're right. I mean, it's not just about glamorization, right? Like that Pulses video that you saw, that is Rajaram Bhaiya. So, you know, he still would like to grow like that because he sees the value of having all these foods. And he feels constrained by, you know, the lack of seeds, the lack of, I mean, and it's also culture, right? It was there at one time. You had all these foods, now you don't. You know, his family would make fun of him if he grows things like that. So, you know, there is all that. But the need definitely. I mean, this March, April, there was unseasonal heat, and people lost up to half their wheat crop. And we've been having these discussions. People don't necessarily link it to climate change. We had to talk through the whole process, and our sathis are so used to disasters. They're like, great, now you're bringing yet another disaster onto the plate, because they also feel, you know, when they have a bumper harvest, the prices come down. So they never have a good deal. So, but then we said, you know, look, all of that's fine, but we know that next March, April, it's going to be hot again. I mean, those are the predictions. I mean, if you're lucky, it's not going to be hot, but if it's going to be hot, what are we going to do? So we are discussing these strategies of mixed cropping as a coping mechanism, as a way for resilience, and it could cause more labor. You know, it could be more labor intensive. You know, we have to talk through all these processes. So what happened this year is that the rainfall was pretty bad. Like right now, there's been so much rainfall that even the good crops, I think pretty much it will be a loss. Like very little will survive. I mean, rain during the harvest period is the worst possible time to have rainfall. But what happened earlier was there was this long dry periods, and people had, you know, a lot of people were cultivating kodo millet. And what they were doing is they were just broadcasting it, right? Getting folks to grow line sowing is very tough. You know, we are still trying to do it. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But people were just broadcasting their kodo millet. And when I went to some of the fields last month, people were like, there's so many weeds. We can barely see the kodo millet because there's so many weeds. And how are we going to weed? You know, we've grown it in an acre. Who's going to go around in that acre weeding? So I was telling them, look, that is why we've been talking about line sowing, because if you sowed in a line, then you could take those weeders and just, you know, weed in the middle. So, I mean, we'll have to sort of, you know, get those local stories, see, you know, there was this problem. That's why we were talking about this. But, and people are migrating for work, right? So who's there to do the work? I mean, that whole feminization of agriculture, I mean, it's all falling on women's shoulders. I mean, in Sitapur, actually, it's less of that. In South India, if you see, it's pretty much women. In Sitapur, you still see men working. I mean, sometimes it's one member of the family moving to the city, the rest are in the village. But, you know, whoever is left, it's a lot of work on their shoulders. So, but yeah, there's no alternative, so we have to, you know, push these options.
Anu has a question,
And
Richa has to start wrapping up.
Yeah, I also have a question. Anu, go ahead. You ask your question first.
Thank you. My question was, maybe you already covered this in another form, but you know, last time I was in India, I noticed that in every store you have, you know, a million products by that are part of these food empires, right? By Baba Ramdev, Baba Sri, and then by Patanjali brand, etc., etc. And I was wondering, it seems like they're very popular. And at least my mom, who I spoke to about this, seemed to think that people are buying them not because they are necessarily convinced that of the brand name being Hindu is necessarily better, but because they're also cheaper than multinational brands like Ariel or whatever, right? That's one reason. But that said, you know, all these brands, Ramdev, Patanjali, Sri, they sell a variety of products across the spectrum. So I'm wondering what, if any, kinds of specific impacts they might have had on the food markets in India in general. Thank you.
And my question is, actually, you started talking about some of this, Duji, in your last comments, but you know, somewhere in the middle of the talk, you made a really important comment about how we have de-skilled people when it comes to food. And the journeys, both of the work, like the work that you both have embraced in different sites, in different ways, it has been not only generating knowledge about food, the erased knowledge, but it's also been sort of an intervention in that politics of de-skilling, and what does it mean to sort of interrupt that and then build new knowledge base with communities. And so that is one thing that we haven't touched on. And if you could talk a little bit about that process and that commitment, and how that has developed with the communities.
Baba Ramdev and Sri, see, they are extremely savvy people. Let's put it that way. They are not trying to go against the market, but rather they are trying to co-opt the market for their purposes in some sense, right? It's one thing to say that the market is corrupting you, and it's another to say, hey, I have something that is better than what the market offers, right? So that's the strategy that I see them taking. And they've been quite open about it in saying that these are business ventures. And we are going to run it like a business. It's just that we are believers of Sri or Baba Ramdev or whatever, and that we have the blessings of the Guruji, right? Or the Baba. So, yes, they are cheaper because it's also inferior quality. Many a time this has been shown that the very same plants that are manufacturing for these FMCG, multinational FMCGs, are the same manufacturing plants from which Baba Ramdev's products are being made at a lower cost. Yes, because you would use different ingredients or different processes, but you have the whole setup. So there are very few commodities that these guys are manufacturing outside of the standard supply chains. One. Two, where they are doing that, and I'm talking in the FMCG market mostly, but if we look at the food grains and the food production side of things, it has been about getting an in certain geographies where they can go work with the farming community there, not just, they will go in as an economic activity or as a development activity, but it will happen in their satsang or in their, ashram and stuff like that. So it's very much, I don't mean to, trivialize, but in some sense it's an identity politics that is being played or that they are trying to play. And not equating it or in any way looking at it with the same lens as caste and the dynamics of exploitation that we have seen over the ages, but this is yet another flavor of that, where they would like to show themselves as as an institution that transcends caste and religion, but effectively is dogmatically, ideologically very much soft, if not hard in the thought, and very much believing in those ideals and ideas and espousing them, but with the facade of the market and of commodities of nationalism, Indian brand hai. So that's what I feel about that. Regarding reskilling and de-skilling, it's a constant challenge because the de-skilling of rural communities did not happen in the last 50 or 100 or even 200 years. If we look historically, long ago also, if somebody was good, they were sent to the court of the nearest Raja or sent to the nearest trading center to become a scribe, to become a tradesman, or to become a trader, and later on professionals like doctors and first it was advocates, lawyers. Oh, in our family we have 3 lawyers from 4 generations ago, right? That is told so proudly in my family, in my father's side of the family. That 4 generations ago, we had 2 lawyers in the family. And what does that mean? It means that families that were there in the rural space have always aspired to send the best among them out to the urban centers, and they rarely come back, nor do their children. And over generations, I mean, we can see that even now, right? Who is left in the villages to take care of the land? The ones who couldn't make it to the city. Always. And this is not just India, by the way. This is not just India. Across the world, that is the case. So effectively, we have de-skilled. When I was talking earlier, I was actually talking from the consumer perspective. How we have de-skilled ourselves from identifying what foods are good, what foods are not, what is better, what is not. But in the production side as well, it's been a much longer process of erosion, of extraction. I shouldn't say erosion, it's extraction. Right? Systemic extraction of talent out of the agricultural pool. So today, if we want to change that black box so that what goes in will bring something differently, a different outcome, then we have to reskill all those things that were lost from that black box called rural space. So it's not a small task. It is a multi-generational endeavor where we constantly ask ourselves, by doing this kind of processing, am I just bringing out a better product? It is a better product. It is at least 10, if not 20, 30 times better than what is available in the market today. But that is not the point of the endeavor. The point is that this is available in a village, and worse crap than this is available in the developed first world for people to eat. Right? So when we say reskilling, we are not just talking about skill for the purpose of economic improvement. Yes, we do want that. Naturally, when we have a better product, if we are able to position it properly, if we are able to bring it with the right politics, we should be able to improve the financial status of our sathis in the various places where such process is being set up, where such units are being set up. But at the same time, we are also talking about reskilling these communities about their own foods. The points that Sudha was talking about in terms of pulses, in terms of meats, in terms of milk, right? So, like Sudha pointed out, and I want to underline this, I know she already mentioned this, but when you're growing something, and there is a procurement center right there, why would we expect that someone who is cash starved is going to consume it locally? They are, of course, going to go sell it at the procurement center and get the cash for that. And what will that cash buy them? They themselves will not be able to buy the very product that they have sold, the raw product that they have sold, once it is value added and brought back into the village.
Yes.
They will not be able to
brought back because
and it's never brought back. I mean, we all know that. I mean, the recently we were looking at some stuff here, and people had this question: wasn't this made in India? Why are we buying it here? Right? And yes, some of the best things. I mean, we see this with sitafal. Sitafal is a very seasonal fruit, extremely nutritious and amazing fruit. Actually, I know sitafal, we don't understand talking about it like this. But the best sitafal will go to Bombay and Bangalore and Chennai and other places, unless you go to the farm, or not even the farm, but that part of the countryside where these fruits are harvested, and you tap at that point, you will be able to get that fruit. Otherwise, it gets packed and shipped away, and nobody else in Chikbalapur or Chintamani or any of those intermediate places will be able to see it. Even in Bangalore, it will be there only in the upscale markets where it will go for a premium price, which most people do.
So Sitapur is Sharifa.
In Sitapur, it would be Sharifa. Yes. and in English it's custard ice.
Custard ice.
Yeah. So yeah.
I'm here at the end. I'll just make a few, I'll try to quickly. The whole reskilling thing, I mean, again, since 2017, I've just like dived into history and it's so fascinating. Agriculture, the way we talk about it as if, farmers can do everything, farmers did everything. The Mughal era is well documented, but I'm sure it happened in the pre-Mughal era also. The Mughal era, the post-Mughal era, until the British came, this whole enterprise, rural enterprise was so well supported. They had heavy administration there. They supported farming from, everything was planned, right? Like the farmer needs seeds, they got money for purchasing seeds with the understanding that, they get the harvest. Any kind of on-farm support required, all of these things were managed at the Subha or the different administrative units. Things were managed. There was a thick administration
in the Mughal era.
See, the Mughal era is documented.
Okay,
right? Well, I mean, you have a lot
Just
of
like the
documentation.
British, I don't think the Mughals were so stupid as to bring in new systems. They would have co-opted the existing system and put their chap on it and said, our boss did it, man. Nobody else in the world has done it before, and our man did it.
They built on it.
They did build on it. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't. But
And they were good at collecting revenue also. So,
yeah, and they were good at writing.
Yeah. So, I mean, the kind of support, because farming in South Asia is very uncertain. This whole, even with this, we started off thinking, post 2010, we had all these erratic monsoons and we had the hailstones and, all these are climate change. I look at the historical documents, they have hailstones, they have droughts, they have excess rain, all of these things. I mean, maybe it's more frequent now, but it isn't that it didn't happen back then. There was this disastrous famine in 1896. I mean, my personal story, the one that I wrote on Facebook, that's also around that famine, because there were these cataclysmic events regularly. So all administrations knew, the pre-colonial administrations supported them, because that's how they held on to their power. With the British, there was this complete change. They did not forgive loans, they did not support people during famines, all of those things, right? So I mean, that was also that was a period of de-skilling. That was when all the artisans, all of those stories, I think, are well documented, are well written. So when we are talking about de-skilling, we're actually, we need to go back to that, decolonizing and all of that kind of stuff too. And the amazing thing is so many relationships still exist. And I think this kind of ties into Shiny's question about politics of food and politics of Hindutva, because I don't think we addressed it sufficiently. Even today, most of the traders, food traders, are Muslim. You have these Muslim communities across the country, different relationships. In southern Karnataka, it is that the Muslim traders are the ones who go to villages and make contracts for mangoes. Right? So they say either they will hire the people to pick the mangoes, or they will, they just make sure that the mangoes are picked and sold in the urban centers. Now, with all the Hindutvaization, there are all these efforts to break these links. So what happened was, this was in the Mysore area, right? Mysore area, they just said, no, we are not going to allow Muslims into our villages. And
traders.
Muslims, they went around with they went around with a drum saying no Muslims allowed into our villages, and the value of mango crashed.
The price.
So they only paid the price.
I mean, not everybody, right? Not everybody. The political influencers, they consolidated their power. Okay. It's the mango growers who suffered, and I mean, it's so there are all these those attempts to reshape things. So the mandis, right? There are all these people who are attempting to take over mandis, because in many places again, you see Muslim traders who have strong links at the markets, at the mandis. Fruits, I mean, just fruits in general, vegetables. There's so many of these links between different communities, different across the country, which are being looked at, examined, broken. Now, what will emerge in its place, we don't know. Adani. No, right. Good point.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
what is also happening is a lot of these small traders, right? The small business people who are, very much in the BJP camp, they are all suffering. All your medium and small and micro industry, like MSME is really suffering. And a lot of them are BJP supporters. They're going through all this pain, but somehow, culturally, that whole idea of the Hindu Raj, all of that,
Or they don't make the connections, just like I
What
was.
they do?
they make the connections.
They're very smart people. They make the connections, but they're okay with it because they're not being touched by these violence.
No, they are suffering pain.
They're
thinking
suffering
that
pain that
they are
because the
suffering more
others
pain. The
that
others
they
are
hate
suffering more pain.
are suffering more than I am suffering. Right? At least that's the and of course the Tina thing. There's no alternative. That's another thing that you commonly hear. We're talking about the politics of
Yeah, but just sort of to tie that thing that food. There's so many intricate connections in food, and in the age of Hindutva, so many of those are getting challenged. So I mean,
and
we really don't know where we are going.
Yeah, and that Hindutvaization of food is a big concern. Because as I was talking about millets and sattva and all that, there is a clear market benefit to painting it in those colors. So, which means that we as those who are working to promote better nutrition, inevitably will get co-opted into that, or not co-opted, but painted by the same brush. So, is that what we want our efforts to be colored as? No. Then we better speak out and say, look, this is not the history that we are talking about. This is not the millets that we are talking about. We are talking about this reskilling of societies and not just about one good food that will save everyone and bring about a glorious future for farmers or for consumers. So yeah. It's time, I think.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sudha and Viji, and thank you to Shiny and Anu and whoever else is on Zoom. And thank you all for coming and spending this time with us and really actually developing a deep conversation. This was very inspiring.
I was thinking, I went to 2.5 hours, so what will we talk? And then I was like, no.
I knew that we had lots to talk about.
Yeah, we could go on forever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this. Just for the record, I forgot to start the recording when Richa started. So we really thank all the co-organizers for this. Richa, if you don't mind, could you please put it on record again?
Yeah, okay, yes. So of course, the Institute for the Environment, Gender, Women and Sexuality Studies, Geography, Environment and Society, Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Change, and Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Thank you to all of these co-sponsors who helped to make this event possible.
Thank
And
you.
I would like to really thank Richa for sort of bringing this together, synthesizing it. I mean, the conceptualization, the format, all of that. I mean, it was great. I loved it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Well, I was about to say weekend, but the weekend is still.
It feels like the weekend.
Everyone online, thank you. Bye. Oh, it's the other camera.
Okay. That's okay. They saw it, right? Yeah.
Bye.
Yes, it is.